Chapter 2, A Life Unchained. I hold joy knowing that Danielle will live on through all the lessons that she taught and the example that she lived by. It is who she was that I find so incredible, and that is who I want to introduce. It is more than just something she did, it is who she was that made her special. Everything exuded with such a level of grace and elegance, her spirit was wild, and her life was beyond remarkable. Danielle was a lover of dance as much as a lover of teaching the art form she loved so much. The lives forever remember her and the legacy she instilled. It is this legacy that has left so many who truly knew her with a huge hole in their hearts. I am sad the world was robbed of such an incredible individual. Many lost a true friend, mentor, and mother. Her ability to be an authentic friend cannot be replaced. I too fall short of her greatness. Danielle was truly the best friend I have ever had, and she inspired me to be a better friend, a role model, and a better lover of all people. She was truly a pure soul, a soul which through my experience often becomes a target for the people of unsavory character. I can't explain the male desire for a pure woman and the ability to tarnish that purity. It didn't help that her physical beauty and dancer physique was something that rivaled the world's most beautiful models and actresses. She was a true beauty inside and out. She was something rare and for many a prize of conquest. Some even viewed her as the perfect art piece for their lives. Nothing more than another thing to add to their treasures. Danielle told me many stories of very arrogant men whose behavior was outrageous. The behavior that comes from men who just don't get the concept of no. Many times I have witnessed as men win them over regardless of. Most times these are men who are obsessed with women. Danielle is one and a perfect target, constantly on the hunt. Women have expressed being displays of affection, the extreme advances of men finding. The men see it as simply needing the right personal friendships with guys who won't. Many who seem to tend our nature, but some challenges to be overcome. Intention to find ways truly dangerous. For my mind to hear even more her. To this day, the one is about one of her past trips. From my understanding, over 7 years. She even helped to that time. To the outship was perfect. It was by extreme levels of disrespectful behavior and sociopath mentioning. There is one mentioning. Since it meant that each nude recital to display each student. 3 times high stress overload for each event. Danielle activity, love, and care into each special for everyone involved who worked for her during that time. He had nothing but the best for her. It was during been some tension in her relationship, a relationship that she nurtured. She practically considered her as it was in her nature for what was about to happen and for the day to prepare for the recital amphitheater for 1,000 attendants. There was a lot to do. It was the reason she would often hire setting up, and she expressed perfectly as the show started to show that she realized that thankfully she lived 5 quickly run home to find one of the most imagined. Her love had packed up everything and left in one afternoon. Noticed they disappeared out. Only a note. I would have said, but it honestly doesn't matter her to have something like that occur to her. Clearly that and how important her recital is. It is this others that pushes my butt to do what they want at the expense is unacceptable. And I believe both Danielle and I had been behavior throughout our lives. In case the advances, while somewhat unwelcome. I have a fair share of men who don't respect. It is this lack of often causes much trauma on our planet. Danielle's time of teaching beautiful young experience like my own has applying what I have learned in my own and taught me more about my trauma, quite revolutionary. Me an experience of being violent of the opposite sex. I'm and awoke to her sex quickly turned more sinister. Someone in to cross an unspoken boundary space. She of her creating pleasure she never. It was a confusing experience to be jaded by such a lewd. Hear this, but it also made me I went through. One had over me to make me I did not choose to feel. Predators convince the victim something that feels so good. Abuse. It is wrong on every day all around. Open our eyes to the behavior that my own. I had needed some massage. Slightly injured myself playing soccer. I ever expected a simple leg massage experience. I didn't think it truly might have been accidental. I knew better than it also included a far. Immediately jumped up and expressed I never expected the response. I decided to point out the fact that also to turn the scenario back, I should explore my desires. Honestly, I couldn't get me to an excited state. Not just physically, but mentally felt feelings towards a man ever. It never interested me. It inspired me to explore. What to do was leave. I gathered my things. Many people live with because I never had to endure family members or other predators. I am grateful for them and understand how differently their trauma. I was because I found a silver lining. If a man could make me feel, I probably didn't need to question my sexual orientation. I also didn't have to act like a man to be a man. I can embrace my more feminine attributes versus pretend they don't exist. Some men act manly to prove to others that they are straight. I wear more pink without worrying about what others might think. I grew in my experience while Danielle faced far more psychological issues. I hadn't realized just how violated I was until I talked to Danielle. It made me understand further the traumas she had endured her entire life, traumas that she had shared with no one. It would have been impossible for her to share all the traumas from her life with me. It wasn't our primary focus, and it won't be mine either. Our focus was on the joy we could find in the experience we were given, not to muddle in the sadness of the past. Danielle told me about the 2 violent physical rapes that had also happened to her. These were far more traumatic to her than the massage therapist. They aren't stories I can share much detail about since Danielle only shared bits and pieces. Suffices to say, she was able to help capture and imprison one and never told me about what happened to the other. Considering her top secret past, I knew better than to ask questions. She always seemed to have a desire to make things right. The local Sedona Police Department attests to many arrests as a result of her efforts. Danielle lived a traumatic life despite the grace and beauty she actively cultivated in her life. Danielle lived a difficult life as a woman, including over 13 miscarriages throughout her lifetime. Despite all her efforts to be a mother, she could never make it very far through the pregnancy. Thankfully, she was never short of children in her life. Despite her shortcomings, she lived in an abundance of glorious children. Dancing and her students helped keep her sanity through all the trauma. It broke my heart to hear about the miscarriages. It was something that I never felt Danielle had fully healed from, especially one instance that stood above all the others. Many years before I met her, she was engaged and she was a family. Her fiancé traveled for work and sadly on his trip suffered an accident that claimed his life. She found out shortly after that occurred that she was pregnant with his child. I couldn't imagine what she went through during that time, even as she explained it to me. To end the story with losing the baby too, Danielle had to be mentally devastated. Left alone with insurmountable losses, Danielle told me of the struggles she faced. The sadness and depression were overwhelming. To cope, she slept on the red rocks under the stars. Being under the night sky seemed to bring her a sense of peace. Danielle told me how much she isolated herself from people during that period of time. Often she hid her trauma. I can't completely explain why she did this, but I feel it was to protect them. Only her senior students shared in the stories that were inappropriate for children. I only pray that people aren't left to fend for themselves in those situations. I found that Danielle spent much time retreating from the world after the biggest traumas. This understanding helped me realize more and more that it takes big traumas. Danielle's methods she used. I have yet to find a way to stop lessons on how to cope. This lesson being the power of found the risks that arise when I've seen the benefits of my life. Life through decades. As someone who saw anxiety, it is in my energy. Dancing is in my life that brings heat. The dancing was always, she expressed her emotion. Depending on her mood, she in her dance that it would bring. Danielle knew the power of expressing those things she loved. She transmuting her traumas, healing to those who watched, danced with the passion that lives. The passion she on to glorious heights. She told me of the many times people. She decided every time fame was not something her goals in life were far. She loved in a place that she not the perfect place was in years the dance teacher in Sedona, Arizona. Several others had tried, but in the New York dance community, she was gained the attention of a rich city. She rarely named, she would point out actors who chilled. I honestly don't remember a single one. Danced for 9 years and thousands of children over the years taught out of a studio connected to her house for much of the 90s and until the rate. She was even awarded awards for running a successful. Danielle told me stories of independent spirit during her life. Home at an early age. Things with little resources. An accredited dance academy. And it's amazing to hear how she rose to become the woman she was. When she told of her days in New York, outrageous and heartbreaking. It was the heartbreaks. Danielle Witters. She expressed the deaf community. People were held a horrible stigma. Danielle didn't fear the people. She held space for the incredible person up for 8 people who had been in their lives. She died of AIDS when the first outbreak of many friends and family did. For all too many, it was terrible. The stories she told of how people would treat the sick and dying. They would walk in and blame the cruel words. They were expressing all their anger and frustration. That release. Inappropriate behavior and was out. I would have to towards the sick and dying as I get it. I have an entire topic as it is something I intensively with Danielle. Mistakes myself. There is very little that I regret because I always did everything I could to fix my mistakes. Some mistakes I still wish I never made, and this book will help so others don't make the same mistakes. It isn't always easy to realize when people need help, especially ourselves. Danielle and I encountered many people who behaved poorly and some people who behaved admirably. We came across simple mistakes all people can make. Despite the blunders, oftentimes people neglected to opt. Fear cripples many into never taking proper action. Danielle's life was full of taking proper action. Danielle tried to live a life of proper action. Living in a big city, she learned the power of presenting the right image. The transition to a small town taught her even more lessons about the power of projecting a positive image to the community. I don't know if Danielle would have moved to Sedona in the first place if she understood half the trouble she would face. Sedona had captured her interest many years before she moved from her home in New York City to the desert Southwest. It was another instance where life decided to tell her she must leave the big. How healing Sedona always felt when she visited. This natural healing energy drew her to one of the most magnificent landscapes, in my opinion, only bested by the Grand Canyon. The beautiful views are unforgettable, and the people who live here are beautiful. Sedona is magical, and Danielle appreciated the beauty that is Sedona. Despite all the problems she faced during her 20 years in town, she never ended up moving. I appreciate the insights she would share about living in a small town, as I grew up in cities many times larger than Sedona. It isn't hard to hide from people in a huge city. However, living in a small city comes with its own set of problems, challenging their entirety as we progressed together as a married couple. We would come to many realizations about why people behave in ways that defy common sense. It was incredible the way that Danielle and I connected in our understanding of the problems of normal society. She and I both had zero tolerance for injustice or cruelty, which we both agreed were plaguing society. We both chose to live by example, to put an end to injustice and cruelty. We each did it in our own way. Danielle accomplished this in ways that I can't even convey. She stood up against the male ego that pushes and manipulates its way to gain what they want. She endured much criticism and verbal abuse for simply doing the right thing. Today, those who choose to do the right thing are rarely celebrated or applauded, often up in rumors which are aimed to discredit those who are in the right. I can't hear one more guy complain about his girlfriend being mad at him when I know that he is unfaithful, lies, or manipulates her. Despite her best efforts, she was still often a victim of the male ego. Danielle Elise Clare was a beautiful example of the divine feminine and the energy of Lilith, the woman in the Bible who walked away from Adam in the garden, for she did not wish to be his servant or object of desire. Danielle told me Lilith was banished to the sea for her slight. Then God created Eve to fill Adam's desires. I found other versions of the story, but I always enjoyed a perfect representation of what she stood for. Danielle would not willingly be the servant or object of another person's desires. She stood up for herself almost as much as she stood up for others. A remarkable person in every way, and that is how she lived her life. We're all incredible people living incredible lives. Only by looking at the synchronicities in our lives can we hope to gain true meaning to what our existence is all about. Our lives each have more potential than most people can realize. We each have so much to offer this planet and other people in our lives when we accept the path life is trying to provide. Some call it being in the flow, others refer to it as the zone, while others may just call it sounds great, but it's not an easy state to achieve. It seems the more you do the right thing and follow the right path, the more challenging the path seems to become. I guess I'm trying to tell you that through my experience and observation are never easy. Challenges, the heartache, to achieve something bigger than the sum of our parts. Each of us to follow a path. Few say yes today are following these ancient saviors and enlightened told us similar stories. Path that leads to infinite beauty. Understanding the ugliness in the world and the greatest appreciation. Seeing the ugliness, Danielle and I beauty. Our journey to get Danielle's life was a gift I didn't fully there for such an incredible person. Cancers existing on the planet. Allowing someone to die on their terms is something that I cannot overstate. Go into an assisted home or I wanted to stay in her house. Just desires. How it could have made it easier for both. Breaking to hear that many people we did, like us, do what is necessary to help. Economic conditions have made them. So many choices only can afford as the person in question. I didn't want to end up in some medical, knew she would die quicker. When I hear about people in nursing homes, it made me about the medical practice into their lives. And places is to medicate people to the point that they feel nothing. Something that I will say is the drive for most doctors were practically ineffective. The resulting severe side effects were being the original issue. Than your traditional cancer. Follow the traditional medical unforeseen consequences to work with the medical establishment, disastrous or counterproductive. Lived by her own constitution. It was not normal in the fact that she alcohol because the hangs. She didn't smoke, did do it in her youth. Stop paranoid. She was even legal medication. Couldn't take over-the-counter effects. She was as I have known. Finding her health problems were far more. We'll discuss the challenges facing a traditional medical industry that practically solely uses prescription medications to solve the health problems that arise. The irony of the situation is I was actively working in the counter industry, helping the cancer patients the mainstream medical industry had already failed. My first year in Sedona was nothing like what I would have expected. I had heard that Sedona was a place that can chew people up and spit them out. I have observed this repeatedly and heard this from many other sources. Strange and interesting stories. The main discussion, the natural energy that exists in this town has a unique effect on people's lives. Many refer to it as a journey through the dark part of your soul. The energies that exist in Sedona seem to accelerate one to a higher level of one's purpose. It brings many struggles, and yet to those who persevere, great rewards await. Rewards that may not always seem like rewards. I doubt many would see the rewards in the initial thought of my story. However, there is a silver lining in such a tragedy. I hope this story will shed light on finding the good when all else seems lost. While Sedona affects everyone differently, those who are experienced will be in for the ride of their lives. Those who fight change and are presented with a barrage of challenges until one either gives up and leaves town or faces those inner demons head on. In my experience, I found this to be true beyond words. To say life works out in mysterious ways is an understatement. The countless people who came through town and have mystical, if not paranormal experiences are so numerous that there are bookshelves dedicated to the subject. It will take an entire book to fully convey the bizarre, if not synchronistic string of events that led me to write this on words to tell you that the sorrow I feel at the loss of my wife has led me down a very different path in my life. It has given my life more purpose. I am unchained from the limits I once had.